Hi, my name is Dave Barrows, and I'm the Capital Region Director of the Aurora Philosophy Institute. Thank you for joining us. Today, we'll talk about the philosophy of hate and the anomaly of anti Semitism. The contents are hate, philosophers, the neurology of hate, psychology of hate, the nexus between philosophy and law, the legality of hate speech, the woke environment, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the bizarre, and then finally the anomaly of anti Semitism in a woke environment. Hate is an intense feeling of dislike or animosity towards a person, a place, or thing, characterized by a desire to harm or to inflict pain, driven by various factors prejudice, fear, jealousy, expressed through actions, words, or thoughts. Hate is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon with a variety of philosophical perspectives. Some argue that hate is irrational and destructive, and an emotional force. Others see hate as a necessary and even positive force for social change. Nietzsche sees hate as a natural and even healthy emotion that inspires the pursuit of goals and asserts the will to power. Hate could be a sign of strength and vitality, and it motivates individuals to challenge social norms and to strive for excellence. Hate is an essential aspect of the creative process. It helps individuals to break free of constraints from tradition and convention, an essential aspect of human existence, but Nietzsche acknowledges that it needs to be tempered by reason, self awareness, and a commitment to transcendence. Plato sees hate as a destructive force, with love being the highest emotion. Hate arises when we become attached to things that are temporary and unreal. We place too much importance on material possessions. We become vulnerable to feelings of envy, jealousy, and resentment. It's irrational and unproductive, leading to conflict and suffering. Hate is a symptom of ignorance and lack of self knowledge, hence the shadows in the cave. Hate becomes because we do not understand ourselves or our place in the world, need for greater awareness and insight into the true nature of reality. And Rand emphasized the importance of rational self interest and individualism. Individuals pursue goals and desires and engage in voluntary transactions with others when it serves their interest. She saw hate as a negative emotion that could cloud an individual's judgment, leading to destructive behavior. In fact, hate is a form of collectivism. Individuals identify with a group rather than themselves as individuals. And collectivism, in her view, is a form of intellectual and moral corruption, leading to totalitarianism and suppression of individual rights. She believed that the individual has a right to defend themselves and that self defense is a rational response to aggression. Rousseau had a somewhat more complex and nuanced view of hate. He says that human beings are naturally good, but society and civilization corrupts them, leads them astray from the natural state. It was a product of social inequity and injustice. Society and its institutions perpetuate inequality and injustice. Therefore, the need to create a just and egalitarian society with individuals with equal rights and opportunities. Individuals could be educated and empowered to recognize their common interests, a social contract, if you will. Individuals give up certain freedoms to secure their basic rights. Society has a duty to provide the necessary education and training. Now, what can we say about the physiology? What can we say about the neurology of hate? Well, when participants view a hated face, several areas of the brain become activated. Using CT, non-invasive diagnostic imaging, and MRIs, you can scan the brain and actually see parts of it light up when there are aspects of anger or hate. The greater the reported hate, the more these areas were activated, and it involves many of the neural pathways in the region of the brain. Now let's then turn to the psychology of hate. The late Daniel Kahneman discovered, if you will, behavioral decision theory, or at least made it into a science. He postulated a dual process with two distinct systems. System one is intuitive and automatic, while system two is slow and deliberate. System one thinking is responsible for everyday decisions. We look for heuristics, the tendency for people to judge events based on how easily they come to mind, the anchoring effect, where people rely too heavily on the first piece of information. And then there is groupthink, the tendency of groups of people to conform to a particular way of thinking or decision making. Jonathan Haidt talks about instantaneous judgments about moral experiences as a flash of intuition. Perception operates rapidly. It diverges from the rational thought processes of morality, such as Kohlberg's stages of reasoning. Hate is then an appraisal that a person or group is evil. It has unique features which motivate the elimination of the object of hate. Revenge is often a part of the hate process. The idea behind revenge is to hurt people or groups as much as has been hurt by them. It is easier, and this is important, it's easier to hate groups than individuals. And hate spreads and increases faster if directed at a particular group. The intensity of the hate grows without specific persons or contrasting information about the group. And hate then is based on stereotypes. What's the difference between hate and anger? Well, hate is more engaged. You want to eliminate the object of hate. It spreads easier than anger. It can spread from one generation to another. Anger tends to be more intense if experienced firsthand. Hate involves the whole individual group, not a particular aspect. Anger is considered more in terms of behavior, in an attempt to remove the obstacle posed by the other person. What is contempt? Contempt arises from repeated anger when nothing changes. Contempt is a feeling the other person is not worthy of anger. Contempt is the cold version of hate. With hate, you cannot be indifferent, and hate is a long term experience. Disgust. It's known to predict prejudice and discrimination. Moral individuals are more prone to physical disgust. How does it manifest itself? Well, the Ugandan Anti-Homosexuality Act of 2023, which at this time was approved by the courts in Uganda, has life imprisonment for gay sex, the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality. Serial offenders with previous convictions can also receive the death penalty. Now, how do we relate philosophy and the law? What is the legality of hate speech? Well, there is assaultative hate speech, and that's based on the nature and the intent. The intent is to harm or threaten an individual or group. It's explicit and a direct attack. Assaultative speech, words are used as weapons to ambush, terrorize, wound, and humiliate. It's designed to produce direct, immediate, and substantial injury. Long-term effects of hate speech on individuals, victims, and victims first experience psychological symptoms and emotional distress. Propaganda and hate speech. Propaganda promotes a particular ideology, hostile or discriminatory towards a particular group of people. It may be more subtle and indirect, using rhetoric. Pornography and silencing. This is an interesting question. It's a distinct but interconnected with the issues of free speech. Pornography is quite a controversial topic in terms of its impact on individuals and society. Some see it as empowering and a form of expression and exploration. Others argue that pornography is harmful, perpetuates stereotypes and attitudes towards women and marginalized groups. Silencing is quite invidious, and it suppresses or restricts speech, often for political or ideological reasons. There are many forms, including censorship, deplatforming, and harassment. Some argue that silencing is necessary to protect marginalized groups, whereas others argue that it infringes upon free speech and the right for people to voice dissenting views. What are the reasons to ban hate speech? Well, hate speech can lead to acts of violence and discrimination against individuals, communities. It contributes to harmful stereotypes and reinforces attitudes. It can lead to hate crimes and other forms of violence. It can erode a sense of safety and security, excludes marginalized groups from mainstream society. People then are less likely to participate in public debate and discussion. Banning hate speech sends a strong message in terms of behaviors that will not be tolerated. Banning hate speech can create a more inclusive and respectful society where individuals feel valued and accepted. There are, of course, many arguments against the banning of speech. It has a chilling effect on free speech and democratic discourse. Others argue that you combat hate speech through debate and discussions, not censorship. Hate speech can be very difficult to define and enforce, and it silences dissenting voices and opinions. There are slurs and code words. It's a subtler form that falls outside of the narrative of hate speech. Slurs can be derogatory. The subtlety of coded language calls its status as hate speech into question. It lacks the kind of immediacy often attributed to hate speech. But, of course, slurs and code words can be very harmful. So, what's the proper focus then with respect to freedom of speech? Some argue that we should focus on what categories of speech cause. We ought to be interested in what speech does. By focusing only on the harms caused, we're drawn into a debate about balancing the costs and benefits of permitting or regulating speech, which may often lead to an impasse. If we turn to our attention to the acts of hate speech, what they constitute can reveal opportunities to avoid the question of balancing harms and can open the door to more regulation. In the United States of America, hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment in cases where it incites imminent violence. How do we criminalize hate speech? Well, we have civil remedies, we have education and awareness, and we have private sector interventions such as social media platforms. There is provision in the criminal code with respect to hate speech, and that's Section 319. For those who advocate or promote genocide or promote hatred against individual groups. The laws try to be balanced with protection of freedom of expression, and the courts have interpreted hate speech laws to prohibit only the most extreme form of expression. In Canadian law, the Whatcott case of 2013, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the hate speech conviction of William Whatcott. He was distributing flyers targeting homosexuals in Saskatoon. The court ruled that the flyers promoted a hatred against an identifiable group. Libel laws are designed to protect individuals or entities from false or harmful statements published or communicated to others. It's used to seek damages or other forms of relief. Defamation is communicating to a third party about a person, place, or thing that results in a decline or impacts reputation. It can be spoken, which is slander, or written, which is libel. It can be either a tort or a crime. And there are defamation laws with respect to legal persons, public officials, state institutions, etc. The internet now transcends national boundaries, which raises questions of jurisdictions and the question of time periods involved in trans-border online defamation cases. Well, what can we conclude? According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, no society has excluded free speech and has not been limited to some extent. Just as Brandeis articulated First Amendment principles based on freedom of conscience, democratic accountability, discovery of truth, and democratic self-government. The government can regulate speech under the First Amendment only when the speech is intended and likely to cause imminent and serious injury. Brandeis' test was based on his Jeffersonian faith in the power of what he called free and fearless reasoning. He concluded that we have no choice but to think for ourselves. Now we move on to the question of the woke environment that we are currently in, the good, the bad, the ugly, the bizarre. So woke then emerged in the context of social justice movements, being aware of social and political issues. It assumed a broader meaning, and its implications can vary depending upon the context. Well, what's good about the woke environment? Well, we're more informed about societal issues. It can lead to empathy and understanding, willingness to take action to promote social justice, challenging the status quo, promoting inclusivity, and greater equity and sense of community for marginalized groups. The bad, well, there can be overgeneralizations of an entire group of people leading to stereotypes and oversimplification. It can be divisive in its lack of nuance. There's a tendency to excessive self-righteousness. It can prevent productive conversation and an unwillingness to listen or engage in critical self-reflection. There is performance activism, which can lead to a lack of meaningful action, and there's the potential to be more interested in appearing woke than in actually affecting change. Now, woke can be ugly in the sense that it creates polarization and division, that it's divisive and pits different individual groups against each other. You then have the cancel culture, where individuals who express views that are wrong, as defined, are ostracized and silenced. An overemphasis on identity, focus on identity politics, and can have a narrow focus on a single issue. There is the bizarre. Yale University is ranked as the #1 best law school in the United States of America. They had a bipartisan panel on civil liberties. More than 100 students tried to drown out and intimidate the speakers. We must remember these are not undergraduates, these are people in law school. Yale turns out a great number of Supreme Court justices. It is ranked #1. More than 400 students, 60% of the student body, signed a petition supporting peaceful student protest. What did they say? Well, there's dangers of police violence in this country, and it's intensified against Blacks, LGBTQ people, Black, trans, etc. Well, that's certainly true, no doubt, but that's not the case in Yale. These are highly privileged people who will deal with the courts and police on a regular basis once they graduate, and they have very little likelihood of experiencing police violence. If you can believe it, the California State University at Monterey Bay encouraged students to report professors for racism if they were not called upon in class. Now, what's the anomaly of anti-Semitism in a woke environment? Well, there's 2 billion people, a quarter of the world's population, now living in conflict-affected areas. The definition of genocide is government or state-sponsored intentional destruction of a people. Examples include the Romani, who were almost completely wiped out during the Holocaust, the Rwanda and Cambodia genocides, the Rohingya, who are taking place right now. It's the Indo-Aryan ethnic group, follows Islam, resides in Myanmar, but they're denied citizenship. And it was argued that there was a genocide in 2017 around a certain group of Rohingya. And then, of course, there's the Holocaust. Not all genocides capture the public imagination. There are no demonstrations that I have found on university campuses for the Rohingya tragedy. Some of these things just go unnoticed and don't seem to be popular. Now, when we come to anti-Semitism, there's an interesting distinction between religious and racial forms of anti-Semitism. The idea of racial forms is that Jews constitute a distinct race based on inherited and inherent traits or characteristics. Abhorrence may find its expression in a number of forms. Racial anti-Semitism represents Jews as a group and as a threat to the values of society. It's much deeper rooted than religious anti-Semitism, for in conversion, there remains the option of that once you're converted, the Jewishness is gone. But in the context of racial anti-Semitism, Jews cannot eliminate their Jewishness. For example, in the Spanish Inquisition and in the Holocaust, it was a hereditary thing. It was a blood thing, not the fact that you converted to another religion. Jews, of course, constitute a distinct racial or ethnic group which negatively impacts Gentiles, and that's the presumption. Martin Luther in 1543 wrote, "On the Jew and their lies, Jews are a base, whoring people, that is, no people of God, and their boasts of lineage, circumcision, and law must be accounted as filth." That's again Jews as a racial group as well as a religious group. We have throughout history bourgeois casual anti-Semitism. Perhaps the best example is the Bloomsbury group, which was composed of writers and intellectuals, first half of the 20th century, very famous names, Virginia Woolf, John Maynard Keynes. I do not like the Jewish voice, wrote Virginia Woolf to Lyndon Stacey, husband Leonard, who was himself Jewish, condemning the placid, easygoing vulgarity of your race. This is interesting. John Maynard Keynes, who would have won the Nobel Prize in economics had been available at the time, wrote, "It is not agreeable to see civilization so under the ugly thumbs of its impure Jews who have all the money and the power and the brains." And for the Nobel Prize winner Albert Einstein, he wrote, and about Einstein, he is a naughty Jew boy covered with ink, that kind of Jew, Albert Einstein. Well, why the Jews? Well, Jewish people are a visible minority, even though there are only 16 million of them. Jews are relatively successful in certain high-profile fields. The number of Nobel Prize winners vastly exceeds the proportion of Jews in the world. There are now 13 or 14 Jewish owners in the United States National Basketball Association and National Football Association sports teams, which gives them a very high profile. And of course, there is the question of Israel and the Palestinians. There is a logical fallacy here, of course. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore all men are Socrates. It works just as well here. In Israel, about 72% or 73% of the population is actually Jewish. The remainder is Arab, Druze, etc. And so not all Jews are Israelis. About half the Jewish population lives outside of Israel. So Jews and Israel are related, but not exactly the same. What can we conclude then about the incongruity of anti-Semitism on university campuses in the woke environment? One would think that in the woke environment, one would try to be inclusive and tolerant of all groups in society. However, it's always been the case that it's been acceptable for the proletariat as well as the bourgeoisie to be anti-Semitic. I'd like to thank you for your time, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you very much.